Good morning. I thought I'd take a break from my series on the things I like about Jamaica and Jamaicans and talk about peace. And there's an obvious reason for that, right? Russia has just invaded at least parts of the Ukraine, and I think there is a worry, at least in some countries, that this will expand further into a much broader war. And maybe that isn't a worry for you here in Jamaica. You're a very long way from the Ukraine, you're a very long way from the countries that might get involved in war with Russia. But I think, obviously, world peace is an important part of everybody's aspirations, and we often pray for it in our masses, right? And it just struck me how very different the way the world talks about peace and the way the church talks about peace are. And even if you are personally not that interested in the situation in the Ukraine, I think thinking about peace is important because we want peace not just on the world stage, we want peace in our country, we want peace in those parts of our country where there is violence, but also on a smaller scale, we want peace in our own families, and we want peace in our own hearts. And so the topic of peace is actually very important. The Roman general Vegetius, and it's very often quoted, people don't know his name, but they know the saying. The saying is, he wrote, if you want peace, prepare for war. If you want peace, prepare for war. And the American president, Roosevelt, said, speak softly and carry a big stick. And both of those sayings capture an idea of peace, that peace happens when strong men are scared of you, right? We want to carry a big stick so that the strong man is scared of us and won't attack us, because they fear what might happen as a consequence. Now contrast that with the way the church talks about peace. Pope Paul VI famously said, if you want peace, work for justice. Now that's a very, very different view. That's not the view that you have peace by having a big stick and people being scared of you, because what goes wrong is that every so often someone comes along who isn't that scared. In the case of President Putin, he has a large army of his own, but also, I presume, he's banking on the fact that the West knows war with Russia could be very, very dangerous. Even if they were to win the war with Russia would be incredibly costly. So President Putin is banking on the idea that actually the West will perhaps take some economic actions in terms of sanctions, but they won't go to war with him. So the fact that America has a very, very big stick, a much bigger military than Russia, doesn't scare Putin, because he knows that that America knows that if they went to war with Russia, even though they are militarily very strong, it would be nevertheless very costly. And of course, in the case of Russia, it's particularly scary because both America and Russia have nuclear weapons. But none of that is strange. None of that is unusual on the local scale too, right? You get people who, for whatever reason, are not scared of the threats against them. They think of themselves as invulnerable. I think, for a start, many young people do think of themselves as invulnerable. So you get gangsters who are willing to carry out violence against others, and perhaps in the back of their mind they know that they might be the subject of reprisals, but it doesn't worry them. Death hasn't become something real for them, or if it has, it's such a common part of the world they live in that it doesn't scare them. So the big stick isn't any deterrent. And in our own families, you get the same thing. In every family, I suppose, there are people who are difficult. I mean, in the worst case, you get people in families who are bullies to the others in the family. And maybe they feel they have the biggest stick in the family. So if peace resides in the idea of carrying the biggest stick, then there will be war, at least some of the time. And so the kind of peace that Vegetius and Roosevelt are talking about is not Christian peace, it's the absence of war. But actually it doesn't even guarantee that, right? And we're seeing that at the moment in the Ukraine. The alternative, as I say, is this idea that if you want peace, you should work for justice. Now, of course, justice is a word that I think people associate justice with, first of all, international politics, and then local politics. But it's an idea that we actually need to apply in our everyday lives. Justice just means giving everybody what they deserve. People getting what they deserve. And actually, being just to people is very, very, very important, and actually creates a society where we can all live in peace. And that's true in families as much as in societies. It's true in our lives, in our personal lives, as much as it is on the international stage. So I'll give you an example. When COVID began and collections fell, the parish was concerned that they didn't have enough to pay the people who work for the parish. And there was a discussion about how to reduce hours and reduce pay. Now that's very difficult. People have a right to their wages, and employers have a duty towards the people that they employ. You can't just decide, well, I'm short of money this month, so I can't pay you. That's not just. And so we had to come to a more just settlement of that situation. And in our own families, you get injustices that creep in. People who get treated differently because of, whatever it might be. They're the first son or whatever it might be. And I think very often you see the kinds of effects that you see in Russia at the moment, where somebody is a bully in the family, so people leave them alone and they let them have what they want and they get their way. And actually they don't get better, but worse. So justice within families is very, very important, and justice in our own personal lives is very important. Now, justice, I want to say, is a minimum. We should always be just. And if you act unjustly, you are acting sinfully. It's not just that justice is a nice thing. Justice is a minimum. And Jesus actually calls us to much more than justice. Right? We just had the gospel last weekend about loving your enemies. That's about much more than being just to people. It's about loving them, taking their good into consideration. Now, loving someone doesn't mean you can't oppose them. And the Catholic Church thinks there are very limited, but nevertheless real situations in which nations should go to war. And the most obvious example of that is when it is necessary to defend the innocent. You can't allow the innocent to simply be crushed under an oppressor without doing whatever you can to stop that oppressor. And so loving somebody who is acting as a bully might involve, in certain situations, standing up to them, not allowing them to have what they want. But always not through anger, not through bitterness, not through resentment, but through love. We stand up to those who act badly. And we don't let them have what they want, because actually letting them have what they want is not good, not just for us, but for them. And so justice and peace and love in our families is hard. And I know that many, many families, in fact, I suspect nearly every family struggles with these things in one way or another. And so it's no wonder that on the world stage you see these things play themselves out. So I ask you to join me and the Pope has already asked us to do this, to pray and to fast for peace. The Pope has asked us to make Ash Wednesday a day of special fasting, even beyond the Catholic Church, for peace in the Ukraine and in Russia and in our world in general. And maybe we can, even if we're not concerned about that situation, and let me just be honest, I am very concerned, but even if you are not concerned, let's all pray for peace in Jamaica and peace in our own families and peace in our own hearts.